So, during season 1 of The Wheel of Time, I didn't have a channel, and hardly anyone around me watched it, or even if they did, no one really wanted to talk about it much, so I didn't have a lot of opportunities to vent the many feelings, which were mostly negative, that season 1 generated. But, well, I do have a channel now, and now that season 2 is over, I have a place where my thoughts can finally get out, and I'm happy to say my feedback on season 2 is going to be much less ranty and a lot more appreciative than what I had to say about season 1. But before I start talking about season 2, I have some general takes and impressions and thoughts to share that apply to the show as a whole. I strongly suspect that this video will need to be done in 2 parts. We'll see how it goes. First things first, before anything else, let me insert a bit of perspective right at the start. I haven't talked about it on the channel, but The Wheel of Time is... saying that it's one of my favorite series is... well, it's technically true, but it's nowhere near enough to express my relationship with this series. The Wheel of Time was one of my most formative reads in my reader's journey, my genesis and my development as a fantasy reader. I'm not going to go as far as to say that this has changed me as a person or made me who I am today. I don't think any one book can claim that in my case, but it certainly has, to a very large degree, shaped me, if not as a person, at least as a reader. It has influenced greatly the direction that my taste developed in. The way that I read, the way that I view and understand fantasy, and my definitions of what fantasy is and is not, and what I expect from it, and what I like and dislike seeing in it. I have spent more time thinking about The Wheel of Time, talking about The Wheel of Time, spinning theories and writing fan stories in the world of The Wheel of Time than I have about any other book or any other series. And it has certainly influenced some major turns of my life, because it was through Wheel of Time fandom that I met the man that I eventually married, and we were both playing a Wheel of Time based game on the internet. It was a fan-made browser game many years ago. Before you ask, it doesn't exist anymore. And the same way, I also got to meet my best friends ever. And all that is to say that The Wheel of Time is a very, very special thing to me. These books are very dear to my heart. And at this moment, I have spent more than half my conscious life being a Wheel of Time fan. That's more than some fans have been alive. So my perspective is inevitably going to be the perspective of a fan of the books, and not only a fan, but a fan who has a very deep personal connection and very deep feelings about this series. So with that in mind, let's have this out in the open. I didn't like season 1. However, the more conversations I have with people about it, the more I notice that everybody who hated it, or okay, maybe not everybody, but the clear majority of those who hated it for reasons which didn't bother me all that much. The major one of these being the many departures from the source material, the many changes that were made, both in terms of things being cut and things being added. Yes, you heard that right, I didn't mind most of the changes. And no, this doesn't make me less of real Wheel of Time books fan. I'm not going to be turning in that book fan card just yet. Okay. So how can I be a fan of the books and not be mad about the show being so different? It's not that hard. Brandon Sanderson suggested that we try and view the show as a different turning of the wheel. You know, a way things could have happened in a different version of the world. So if you think of portal stones, for example, and the way they connect multiple possible versions of the world, and how in each one of these worlds things are just a little different, events didn't quite happen the same way as in the next world, and so on. And we've stepped through a portal stone and we're witnessing a different possible unfolding of events. It's an adjacent reality somewhere in the Wheel of Time multiverse, although not the exact variation that we're familiar with from the books. If you can accept that, you may very well be able to enjoy the show for what it is, at least the good parts of it. Of course, just because this works for me, it doesn't mean that you have to see things this way. I've seen some comments and opinions that fans shouldn't be expected to do any such mental gymnastics to justify the show being so different from the content we love. And if that's how you feel, if that's how you see things, I've got nothing more to say. You know what you wanted, you didn't get it, end of story. But what I wanted, I'll make a slight detour here. Stay with me, I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. About the time the Wheel of Time Season 1 was going on, I also saw the new Dune adaptation. Now, that was a perfect, book-faithful adaptation, down to literal narrative and dialogue being directly lifted from the pages. And while I appreciated the visual achievement that the movie was, the effects, the casting, the acting, and everything, in terms of story, I was bored. The story was exactly what I already knew pretty much by heart, beat by beat. And I think this was when I realized that I actually prefer adaptations that take some more creative liberties. This may come as a surprise from a person who likes to reread, because after all, how can I say that knowing the story makes it less enjoyable when I literally like to reread stories where I definitely know what happens and how it ends? It's a different experience. When I reread, I go back to a familiar place to relive my favorite moments, and the familiarity with the story gives me a sense of comfort and ease, and that's great. But when I watch an adapted work, the very change of medium brings with itself an expectation of something different. And so I want to be taken on a new journey. So, back to the Wheel of Time. I understand the disappointment of fans who just wanted to relive the same story they know and love. You basically wanted a reread, but in a different medium. I get that. But for me, I wanted a chance to go on an adventure in my favorite world that I didn't already know by heart, and so it could still surprise me and keep me guessing. And you know what? That's kind of what I got. So you will get no complaints from me about the show not being faithful to the books. Moreover, to these people who are saying things like,
"It's got nothing in common with the books. It shouldn't even be calling itself an adaptation. It's a completely different story."
and my favorite,
"It's disrespectful to the source material."
I must disagree, because not only are the major characters pretty faithful to their book versions in terms of presence, behavior, personality, okay, maybe with the slight exception of Lan, who's much less stoic and stone-faced, but in every other aspect is essentially the same character. But also, all the important moments from the books are also present in the show, at least in season 1. If you don't believe me, let me show you. I'm just going to use season 1 here as illustration, so I don't spoil season 2 for anyone. Let's see what happens in book 1 and whether or not it happens in the show. Moraine and Lan arrive in the Two Rivers. Check. The Trollocs attack. Check. Moraine convinces several young people to flee with her and Lan to the White Tower. Check. They leave the village together with Tom Merrilin. Well, check with the slight exception here, because Tom Merrilin makes his first appearance a little later in the show. I'll give you that. Okay. Moving on. They're pursued by the Trollocs. Check. There's a scene with Moraine sinking the ferry. Check. Nynaeve catches up with them on the way. Check. They're forced to stop in Shadar Logoth. Check. Matt picks up the cursed dagger that makes him sick and crazy. Check. They flee from the horrors of Shadar Logoth and are separated. Check. Matt and Rand and Tom Merrilin survive some unpleasant encounters. check. Tom is lost, check. Eventually the two boys reach Camlin, and here's the first major difference because the show skips Camlin altogether and instead moves some of the Camlin scenes to Tar Valon. But let's see what happens in Camlin. Rand gets to meet Loyal, check, and also Min, Elaine and her brothers. Okay, this is a major difference because we don't meet Min in this scene and we don't get to see Elaine or her brothers in season 1. Meanwhile, Egwene and Perrin meet Elias and then some Tinkers. Check for the Tinkers only, because we also don't get to meet Elias in this season. Egwene and Perrin get in trouble with some White Cloaks. Check. They are rescued, after which everybody's reunited in Camlin, mostly check, except the location is Tar Valon instead. Matt is stabilized, check. Moraine gets some information about a threat to the Eye of the World, check. So the whole party travels via the Ways to Fal Dara, which is the closest to the Eye, and then to the Blight, where Rand fights Balsamon using the One Power. Did I hear a check? After the fight, they find one of the seals of the Dark One's prison broken into pieces. I think that's a check. Rand is confirmed to be the Dragon Reborn. Check. So, almost all of these key moments do happen in the show. The only thing that's completely missing is Camlin. It's been replaced with Tar Valon, and some characters are introduced in different locations compared to the book, like Min or Tom Merrilin. All, like Elaine, are left to make their first appearance in the next season. Apart from that, every major story beat is present. All the key events are there. And it's not like these are just some generic fantasy conventions that are present in every fantasy adventure. No, like you can see, some of them are actually awfully specific. So to everyone who keeps saying it has nothing in common with the books, or the showmakers haven't even read the books, grumble, 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 whatever, I'm sorry, that's just not true. However, I cannot say that I don't see where these people are coming from, because yes, the ways we get to these major events, the paths that lead there, the character journeys, both external and internal, have all been changed to be nearly unrecognizable. So this is why I understand where this particular complaint is coming from. It really does feel like we are following a new original story, even if the key plot beats are all the same. So if this is a deal breaker for you, if you absolutely require book faithful adaptation in terms of not only the main key points but also in the details or separate character stories, well, there's no chance you'll be able to enjoy the show. I understand. You're entitled to your taste. I'm entitled to mine. But again, if you can accept that this is a different version of the world and the story, you know, like in mythology or like folk tales, the way they change with each retelling and things keep getting added or omitted or turned into something else, but it's still the same basic story. If you can see things this way, you might be able to connect with the show and enjoy a fresh take on the adventure. I'm just thinking of how many times I have wished I hadn't read these books, or that I could forget them completely so I can experience again the joy of going on this ride for the first time. The show's take on the story is giving me something that's pretty close to that. So on that particular point, no, I don't find the changes to be disrespectful or a mockery of the source material or an insult to Jordan's legacy or any other overly dramatic statements like this. I see the changes as creative interpretation, and I am able to respect the result as a creation of its own. So why then am I saying that I didn't like season 1 overall? Well, to be fair, I mostly enjoyed the first half season. I did have criticisms, of course. I mean, it's me. Of course I'll have criticisms, but even with all the things that I found grumble-worthy, it still felt like the Wheel of Time, and so I was able to forgive a lot. But then it went downhill so hard, even with the allowances that I was making for the things that I didn't like, even with being mostly accepting of the many departures from the source material. I'm not a fan of season 1. Some of the changes I did hate, not because they diverge from the books, but because they are either bad storytelling on their own, or they don't tie in with the show's own internal logic, or both. This is in line with my general complaint about the writing in season 1. I'm not going to go scene by scene pointing out what I didn't like. I'll just give a couple of examples, and again, these are not the only ones that I disliked. There were plenty more. I just don't intend to list everything here. So, one scene from near the beginning and one from near the end of season 1, to illustrate what I mean. Number 1, Layla. Now, I've seen all the reasoning about Perrin's characterization, blah blah blah. Perrin's characterization could have been achieved in a number of less awful ways. I'm sorry, but every time I hear or read somebody's defense of this creative, I'm even reluctant to call it a creative decision. There's this list of reasons why it's not really fridging, And I go, I recall a conversation with a friend about this, and what she said sums it up pretty nicely, so I will quote her. I'm sorry, but the only way it can be more deserving of the term fridging is if they had shown an actual fridge on the screen. I find myself thoroughly agreeing with her. Layla, who thought this would be a good idea? What kind of viewer did they think this was going to help bring in? On top of everything else, it created the impression in a lot of viewers that the show was some kind of Game of Thrones wannabe right from the start. And that's something that, let me tell you, absolutely no one appreciated. But anyway, let's move on to the other example. The Wonder Girl's impossible feat of strength in episode 8, you know which scene I mean, where they destroy the army of Shadowspawn and then Nynaeve either burns herself out or dies, and Egwene heals her back to normal, which was... what? This was both unnecessary and it was also embarrassing in terms of how over the top and how overdone it was, not to mention that it not only contradicts some major lore from the books, but it also doesn't make sense in the context of the show itself. And that brings me actually to the essence of my general unfavorable opinion of season 1, because these scenes are a symptom of exactly the thing that was wrong with this season, and that's the quality of the writing and direction. Not even just the dialogue, sometimes just the way that the scene was presented made me cringe so hard. I'm still feeling uncomfortable just remembering it. That early scene in Two Rivers, when Moraine and Lan arrive at the inn, it was so ridiculous and melodramatic. I mean, this is a scene that actually uses more or less the material from the book, but it was just embarrassing to watch. And then there's something, especially in the second half of season 1. There were a few scenes in the earlier episodes also with this problem, but mostly from episode 5 onwards. It's a flood of fake drama. Let me see if I can find better words. During the first season, the first half season, whatever complaints and criticism I had, the show overall still felt like the Wheel of Time. It carried the core, the essence of the Wheel of Time, but afterwards it became something that no longer felt like the Wheel of Time. The Wheel of Time series, the book series, whatever events it includes, whether you see it as plot-driven or character-driven or whatever, is in its heart an epic fantasy adventure in a world that's rich with history and lore and secrets and choices. It's a story about destiny and duty and paying the price for your choices. Now, whether you will see it as a coming-of-age story or hero's journey or whatever else, it is still an epic fantasy adventure exploring some pretty big themes. My major frustration with the second half of season 1 is that it not only changed the story, plot lines and trajectories, but it turned it into a different kind of story. Because for a large part of episode 5 and 6 and partially 7, it no longer feels like an epic fantasy adventure, and instead it turned into edgy character drama. And that's a different genre. That's different type of television. It may have its fans and its viewers, but that's not the kind of television that I like. That's not what I signed up for when I sat down to watch The Wheel of Time. Now, that's not to say that I hate character-driven stories. On the contrary, the characters are always the heart of every story. I love character moments a lot, and The Wheel of Time has tons of character-driven narrative. But I like this to be done in the right context and not just inserted for the sake of adding drama. The last episode did try to bring things back to the right genre at least, but it was a case of too little too late, and anyway, that episode did other stupid things, so it was not enough to save the season. And the rest of my irritation with season 1 is due to just the quality of the production. That includes everything from the sets and the costumes to the way the scenes were shot, the scene composition, the lighting, and a dozen things that just make it look and feel like low-cost production, like a minimum effort project. Even when I know that a lot of money and effort has been spent on the show, and this is by no means an attempt to shame or demean or devalue the work of everyone who has been involved. Like I said, I know that it has taken a lot of work and a lot of funds and time and energy and motivation and care and whatnot, but for one reason or another, whether it was interruptions in the flow or the COVID or the uncertainty or staffing or the lack of clear direction or whatever, the end result just doesn't look as good as it should. Something somewhere has failed to translate properly from concept to execution. I keep getting this image in my head of a set of radio dials, and each of these is set to somewhere very close to the correct frequency, but just slightly off. Just enough so that we're not getting a perfectly good signal. We're still getting something, but it comes through with reduced quality. Okay, I think I need to stop here. Like I expected, my thoughts and impressions from season 2 will have to wait until the next video. Thank you everyone who listened to this outpouring of my thoughts and feelings. The Wheel of Time is something I feel pretty passionate about, so I'm not sure if I managed to stay coherent the whole time, but I hope I made some sense at least. I would love to know what you think. I promise I'm fine with people disagreeing with me, as long as everyone can stay civil and respect the right of other people to have opinions. So yeah, let me know what you think. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you haven't. I'll be following this video up with one more in the coming days to share what I have to say about season 2. For now, take care and I'll see you around.